What if Great Britain joined America? Today, we're running a really interesting experiment. I'm recreating an alternate map where Great Britain becomes part of the United States. Then, we'll let all the states freely declare war until only one is left standing. When it's all over, we'll see just how far the Brits managed to go. For this run, we're going to use this map of the United States. Even though the timeline's already a bit advanced and we're around year 150, most of the states are still way behind in development. They still don't have mines or anything too crazy yet. Now I'm going to try to draw the outline of Great Britain as close as possible. We tweak this part over here, and once the outline's done, we fill in the whole interior and set it to the classic grassland biome. I'm no expert on the subject, but I'd say the proportions turned out pretty good. Inside Great Britain, we're going to drop a bunch of humans. In real life, Great Britain has around 66 million inhabitants, while the most populated state in America is California, with about 40 million. I used those numbers as a reference to give Great Britain around 200 people in this simulation. We changed the name, and to stop any other state from invading their territory, we manually extend their borders so they cover the entire island. With diplomacy active, it's only a matter of time before the first fights break out. The first war doesn't take long to show up. The state of New York decides to attack Little Vermont and conquers it quickly. The states in this region, even though they're small, are very well developed with advanced ports and several houses covered in concrete. It really pays off for any kingdom to conquer them, because even if they're not gaining much land, they can still grab all that technology. In Minnesota, it looks like a strategic alliance is forming, since you can see several leaders from different states gathered there. The next war also comes fast. The state of New Mexico challenges its neighbor, Colorado. However, it doesn't look like Colorado's going to be intimidated that easily. Even the civilians from Colorado jump in at the border to invade New Mexico. Although nobody expected New Mexico to take advantage of the distraction and send an army around the back to strike directly at the capital. In other news, the state of Georgia, which had previously conquered North Carolina, decides to attack South Carolina. Even though Georgia has more population and territory, it doesn't stand a chance and falls to South Carolina. While that's happening, a conflict breaks out up north between North Dakota and Minnesota, where the King of Wisconsin had also joined the earlier meeting. At first glance, North Dakota seems to be the weaker one since it has a lot less population. On top of that, South Dakota soon joins the war attacking North Dakota as well. That makes them suffer a fast invasion of their territory, and their population plummets at an incredible pace until they're finally conquered by Minnesota. The wars keep coming. Now Florida invades and conquers the new territory of South Carolina. Colorado manages to overpower New Mexico and ends up conquering it, while Wisconsin goes to war with Michigan, where they apparently have the upper hand. Out of nowhere, Iowa conquers Illinois, while Great Britain stays out of any conflict. They're focused on developing their technology and catching up with the rest of the world. They just built their first port, so it's very likely they'll soon start building transport ships and join some war, because if they stay on the island forever, it wouldn't be any fun. The following years go by without any major conflicts until Great Britain finally starts its first war, and it looks like it's going to last for quite a while, especially considering they still haven't built a single transport ship. Meanwhile, the state of Minnesota decides to attack its former ally, South Dakota. The war is pretty intense, mainly in what originally was North Dakota, to the point where the place ends up completely abandoned. The sight of the burning crops is really sad, but the war has to go on, and in the end, Minnesota manages to conquer South Dakota, although at a very high price. They lose all this part of the map, which hopefully they'll be able to take back before some other state grabs it. A century later, we start to see a clear trend. The state of Florida takes first place with 1,800 inhabitants and almost 1,000 soldiers, followed by Minnesota with 1,200 inhabitants and Kansas with just under 1,000 to complete the top 3. Great Britain doesn't even show up in the top 10, although on the bright side, they did finally conquer the state of Louisiana. Shortly after I visit this era, the wars start again. On one side, Great Britain decides to attack its neighbor Mississippi, taking advantage of its superior numbers. On the East Coast, there's a pretty intense war going on between the giant state of Florida and Virginia. Honestly, you don't need to be a genius to guess who's going to win. In the New York and New England region, there are also a lot of changes. New York decides to absorb the smaller states in the area, like Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, which seems to have been split between New York and Rhode Island. Finally, Maine does the same and conquers New Hampshire. In the rest of the country, Texas decides to attack Oklahoma at the same time that the huge state of California attacks Nevada. That doesn't seem to be going very well, because California drops from 700 inhabitants down down to 100, and on top of that, they pretty much lose their entire army, while Nevada still has more than 60 soldiers. Up north, Minnesota keeps proving its strength, now attacking the state of Iowa and conquering it with ease. Great Britain finally defeats Mississippi, while Texas conquers Oklahoma. Having rivers is extremely useful since they let trade ships travel between different inland states and really boost interstate trade. On the west coast, California seems to have managed to get the upper hand against Nevada, while Minnesota, after launching a devastating attack, once again conquers the state of Iowa. You can start to see that there are fewer and fewer states in dispute, and it becomes pretty clear which ones are the main powers in the country. Without a doubt, the strongest ones are Minnesota, Florida, Texas, California, and I'd also include Colorado, although on a slightly lower tier than the others. By the way, the wars are over in this era, so I'll jump forward in time until a new conflict starts. Barely 20 years later, Texas decides to attack the state of Missouri, which, despite being much smaller in territory, has the same population as Texas at this point. Plus, it seems Great Britain has also joined the war against Texas after conquering the state of Alabama about a decade ago. On the west coast, we're also living through times of war. Oregon is suffering the attack of giant California, which seems to want to dominate the entire region, while its neighbor Washington is being attacked by another giant, in this case Minnesota, which is trying to take back the land that Washington had claimed several years ago. In the New England region, something surprising happens. Rhode Island, despite its tiny size, manages to conquer the state of Maine, thanks to the fact that they seem to be the first ones to build and use firearms. If they manage to keep that technology to themselves, they could go really far in this experiment. By the way, it's in their best interest to stay on good terms with New York, since they can use it as a shield to avoid getting invaded by land. The situation in Texas keeps getting worse. Great Britain launches an invasion to try to conquer them, and if Texas doesn't move fast, they could lose the territory. It looks like New York smells that something big's about to happen, so they send colonists to build a settlement nearby. Minnesota manages to push out the Washington troops that were occupying its land, so after that, it looks like the war's over. It's actually a pretty smart decision, considering they were running out of people. Although looking closely, all this chunk used to be Minnesota, and now it belongs to Washington, so the plan didn't work out as well as they hoped. Sadly, Texas is defeated after holding on for a long time. However, the territory doesn't end up in the hands of any state, so anyone can come later and claim it. It's crazy to see how the rankings have changed. Florida and California stay in their same spots, but Wisconsin manages to climb all the way up to second place. Great Britain now appears in the top 5, while Minnesota gets pushed down to the last position. At least they should be thankful that Washington took pity on them and let them live. That said, if we look at territory, things change a bit. California's strategy is paying off, since they managed to grab first place, followed by Florida, and surprisingly, Great Britain in third place. A big part of their land is on an island separated from the rest, which can be good or bad depending on how you see it. About 70 years later, the wars return, with Great Britain preparing its army to attack Missouri, the same state that caused the fall of Texas earlier. For some reason, it looks like they're attacking Kansas here, but it's actually Missouri. Trust me, Florida plays it safe and decides to invade Indiana to slowly expand its borders. Honestly, Great Britain shouldn't have any trouble conquering Missouri with nearly 2,000 inhabitants. Near the area, I see a captain. I'm not sure which kingdom he belongs to. He even looks like he might be from Missouri based on his color, but I really doubt it. In the Texas area, there are several kingdoms that have claimed a piece of land. California, Montana, New York, Ohio, Wisconsin, Arizona, and conveniently, Great Britain, which I'd even say kept the biggest share. California stays loyal to its strategy of conquering the entire West Coast, while Rhode Island decides to invade Ohio and manages to get back its original territory. Even if it's completely devastated now, it's amazing that after starting with such a tiny patch of land, they managed to expand that much. Even if it all ended right here, it'd already be an incredible campaign. It really makes you wonder how far they can go. Great Britain secures all of Missouri's territory, and looking at the map now, I'd say they could start thinking about attacking this part of Kansas next to better unify their domains. Montana, which had barely taken part in any wars until now, surprises everyone by attacking 2 states at once. Even with its big population, it shouldn't be taking that kind of risk because it could go very wrong. On the other hand, Minnesota is taking advantage of California's war with Washington to attack its old territory and get revenge for what happened so long ago. Rhode Island, after a long battle, conquers the area of Ohio inside Texas. They get a lot of land, but it's extremely fragmented, so in the end, they don't get as much value out of it as they could. While Montana conquers Idaho, Minnesota does the same with Washington, and Wyoming finally disappears from the map. On the rankings, Great Britain Britain keeps climbing and reaches second place. Although, to be fair, California just came out of a war, so the number of inhabitants they have right now isn't that realistic. Year 465 goes by. It seems Montana saw the huge potential Rhode Island had and decided to attack it to slow it down. Unfortunately for them, things aren't going the way they expected, and they lose a big part of their territory. In fact, the most important part, since it's where the highest density of houses is located. Meanwhile, Colorado seems to have gotten involved in a war with Arizona, and although they managed to conquer that state, they lose the region of New Mexico, which is now being occupied by different kingdoms. Shortly after that, Great Britain and Florida make their moves, one attacking Minnesota and the other attacking Wisconsin. I think this is the first really big war, considering how huge the populations of the states involved are. On the other side of the country, California decides to take advantage of Colorado's weak moment and attacks it to keep its territory. I noticed that Rhode Island's advanced weapon technology is no longer exclusive to them. Now there are also Florida soldiers starting to use it, while states like Wisconsin still only have simple medieval weapons. In other news, it turns out Minnesota is actually winning the war against Great Britain, conquering big chunks of territory without much trouble, since from what I can see here, there are Florida soldiers attacking Great Britain as well. Or I think they're actually chasing infiltrators from Wisconsin, or because for some reason the king is in this spot. Weak, fat, slow, and pacifist. I have no idea why they chose him as king. During the following years, the wars keep getting more intense until California finally conquers Colorado. Florida wipes out Wisconsin, although without conquering them directly, and against all odds, Great Britain manages to conquer the big state of Minnesota. There are fewer and fewer states left, and now the real superpowers start to stand out, like California, which not only has a huge territory, but also a lot of empty areas that it can still fill up. We also have Great Britain, which grabbed a massive chunk of land in the last war, and we shouldn't forget about Rhode Island either, which keeps getting stronger and stronger. Florida has dropped off a lot lately. If they'd managed to conquer Wisconsin, maybe they could have recovered their former glory, but now there are more and more doubts about whether they really have what it takes to win. So, we take a big time jump to year 590. At this point, California is leading the ranking with 5,200 inhabitants, followed by Great Britain with 4,800, and finally Florida completes the top three with 4,500. From there, we've got Kansas, New York, and Rhode Island with much smaller populations. Rhode Island gets tired of living in New York's shadow and decides to throw everything they have at them. Sadly, things don't look good for them since New York has twice their population. Meanwhile, Great Britain decides to attack Kansas, which is the biggest among the smaller states. Things only get worse for Rhode Island now that they're also being attacked by California. If they already had it bad before, now they're completely doomed, as you could already tell for centuries. The relationship between Florida and Great Britain isn't exactly great, and the war between these two regional giants finally breaks out. Rhode Island keeps losing more and more land, with California conquering the most important region and New York wiping out everything else. Even though at first glance, Great Britain looks like the one that took the most damage, with huge parts of its land completely destroyed, the population gap they managed to create compared to Florida is just overwhelming. On top of that, Florida also joined the war against Kansas, which wasn't a great idea at all, because in the end, Florida was conquered by Kansas. Great Britain is still in a very strong position, so they decide it's a good idea to keep the war going against Kansas and slowly conquer the original territory of Florida. In the blink of an eye, they managed to take all of Kansas. Only 3 states remain standing: California, New York, and Great Britain. Around 50 years later, Great Britain and New York barely have time to rebuild before they get hit with a full-scale attack from California. I'm gonna leave a time lapse of the best war I've ever seen in WorldBox. I don't know if anyone saw this coming, but New York actually ends up winning this incredible battle. California finishes in 2nd place and Great Britain in 3rd. That's not bad at all, but New York staying low-key the whole video and landing the final blow at the end is just pure cinema.